Welcome back to NTV Weekend Edition. Now, the over 2 decades conflict in northern Uganda staged by the Lord's Resistance Army is no longer active, and their war against the government has been over for nearly 13 years. The scars left behind by years of conflict still linger today. Women have been the primary victims of the war, and in a number of these aspects, formerly abducted females, particularly those forced into marriage and motherhood by the LRA, experience more challenges than their non-abducted counterparts do. Now, female survivors of sexual violence in particular experience stigma, discrimination and medical complications, including fistula, HIV/AIDS, STDs, and the burden of raising children born from rape, often rejected by their families. But while we know that they have suffered and continue to do so, there is no clear response made to address these concerns and suffering. Today in studio, we get to host Elizabeth Kemgisha, an advocacy officer with FIDA Uganda, to give us a deeper analysis of the challenges that the post-era war females face and what can be done to improve their livelihood. Welcome to our studios, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Sanja.
So I know for a fact that the LRA war by far is still the most brutal war in Uganda's modern history. But clearly paint for us a picture of what females in the post-LRA war face, the challenges they face.
Thank you for that question, Sanja. Now, for the longest time, it's no news to Ugandans that still that is one of the most brutal wars that we faced. And it's also no secret that vulnerable groups like women and children usually suffer most in times of conflict in any given country, not just Uganda. Now, after the war, which is really a decade back since it happened in Uganda, we have seen that women that have given birth out of captivity, women who got raped, women who got children, weak girls, young girls who got defiled, most of them had to give birth right after the war. Even during the war, we have seen mothers of about 5 children, and she does not know the father of any of the children. So some of those things some of the challenges that they've been facing is rejection from their family members. In Acholi sub-county, most of the families depend on agriculture. So you need land to be able to cultivate and get food for your children and sell and get money and, you know, be able to live in the area. So some of the challenges they face, that especially the boy children are rejected by the families, are some of the work that FIDA has been doing in the recent past, ever since the launching of the project on transitional justice in northern Uganda, that is in 2008, has been trying to integrate these women back into society. We have worked with, for example, the cultural leaders with whom we do what they call cleansing. So the idea is these women participated in the killing of their community, of the other people in the community. They accepted to be raped, they accepted to be waved by rebels. So when they come back into the community, ever since the war ended, they've been having series of cleansing to bring them back into society, to integrate them well into society. Some of them that especially have boy children have been rejected because they believe when the boy children take over the land, they're going to go and sell the land. So it will no longer be part of family property. Another problem that's been really core to the women is the HIV/AIDS and then fistula as one of the spillovers after the war. And up to now, some of the people lack basic information on reproductive health. Teenage mothers, young girls having children as early as 12 years is the order of the day in the area. But also we know that because most of the children are rejected, most of the mothers with their children are rejected, you find most of them end up on the streets and drug abuse and them dropping out of school, which means that there's been really a series of them staying behind, not participating in public spaces, especially for the women. The children not participating in school and being able to build themselves has been the order of the day there. But also core, and one of the things that we usually neglect is their emotional health. You see that one of our victims that we've talked to over time in the different groups we participate and try to involve is the fact that some of the women even sometimes ask themselves, maybe they were paying for a scene before in Uganda and they get shocked. And for the longest time, ever since we launched the project there, we had a challenge with having most of them come to speak to us. So which means we're working on a lot of assumptions of what has happened in the past. So having them come to you and speak to you about what has happened, they usually come out because they expect for you to respond. And Uganda has not had any particular response to the women especially from the government.
So you talked about helping them emotionally. What exactly do you do? Do you just stop at talking to them and maybe counseling them? What other things do you do to help them cope up with their emotional trauma?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, the fact that land is really core to the survival of the women there, because actually sub-county really survives on land mostly. We have given legal aid in that regard. A lot of companies there are trying to steal a lot of local people's land. And because of the patriarchy, a lot of land is owned by men who reject these women to come back and be able to use the land as they should to, even basic access to the land. So a lot of women that we have interacted with are basically leasing land that belongs to some of their families to be able to grow food. So some of the work that we're doing with them is extending legal aid, representing them in court, mediations, getting into discussions with the landowners and being able to see
One
that
of
they
the
can
things I
access.
know is that you can have just about anything, but emotionally, if you're not okay, there is always an issue. I want to take you back to my question. How exactly are you helping them deal with them emotional pain or emotional heartaches that they faced during the war?
Yeah, we're partnering because FIDA is basically a legal aid provider. We partner with, for example, Refugee Law Project, World Vision, to be able that they see counselors to speak to them. And these counselors have been doing a good job to get the women just to speak about the trauma, to ask them what they would like to get, how they would like to be helped. So that's how we've been really trying to help. But also with something that contributes to them, to their well-being emotionally, is being able to get support from their families, which they did not have for the longest time. So trying to integrate them, mediations between their families to accept them back as part of the family is some of the work that FIDA has been doing.
Are there cases where women have actually gone back to their villages and they've been accepted into their homes?
Yes, yes, there have been cases where they've been accepted back. Yeah, and there have also been cases where they've been rejected because especially the cultural leaders who are very big influencers in that society, telling them that they participated in the killing of their other people, that they accepted to be raped, that they accepted to participate and work with Kony during the LRA war. They've rejected them totally, so they do not have any family. Yeah.
So where, you talk of the women that sometimes don't have family. Where do they go to?
The streets.
The streets.
They go and work the land of the rich and farm and then be able to get something to feed their children. But there's so many of them on the streets.
So many
then
on the streets.
Surviving on the handouts from several NGOs or what you can call civil society.
As FIDA Uganda, what are you doing in order to resettle these women? What exactly are you doing?
Yes, so aside from the legal representation and then legal help to be able to see that they can own land and have a permanent place to stay, we also work with civil society that does economic empowerment, which we do, of course, in conjunction with other civil society, to be able to have these women have a job to get some money so that they can be able to survive at the end of the day without waiting for someone to give them money. So that's what we're doing. Another thing, we're working a lot with what they call the cultural leaders, and there's a very huge group in Gulu called Kekwaro that really participates in being able surveying land with the surveyors, finding out whose land it is, whose child it is, how can we support each other. So with those kinds of groups, Kekwara, which is one of the really strongest that brings together cultural leaders, you find that these women find a way of getting back into society, integration into society.
Okay, and also I want to ask you, have you engaged the government to come through and help these people? And maybe if you have, how exactly have you engaged the government? And what are the strategies being put in place to help the women?
Okay, last year, 2018, around August and December, we led an advocacy move to get the women to come to Parliament, because I know because of the NGOization of everything, you find that it's very hard for these ladies sometimes to speak directly to the stakeholders. So one of the things that we did last year is to get the women to come and speak to their own MPs. Yeah, but before that, Honorable Leandro Komakech, their MP in Gulu Municipality, is one of those that's been coming for what they call accountability forums. The ladies being able to interface with their MP and asking, what are you doing in Parliament to be able to see that we are getting the kind of help that we are getting? So last year, like I said, in August and December, we led an advocacy move where these women went to Parliament. They were able to meet the Speaker. The Speaker was touched by whatever the ladies that were saying, and was able to instruct their MP, Honorable Komakech Leandro, to move it as a motion in Parliament so that it is debated and a resolution.
Have you seen any progress so far?
Yes, so far we've seen progress. A motion was moved and it was backed up by 100% everyone in Parliament. And currently Parliament is working on fast-tracking what they call the transitional justice policy, which really works on having reparations for these women and profiling them and having a particular financial strategy to be able to finance the kind of things they're doing, but also helping them get back on ground.
By the way, when did you really start this journey of helping these women?
It was in 2008, and we began with profiling the child mothers, helping them first to speak out on their stories, because for someone to heal, they should be able to first talk about what happened.
Yes.
So we began in 2008, where we rolled out a transitional justice policy to get the ladies to come out, speak to us, to get the ladies be able to demand. So with the kind of work that we're doing, we are seeking to have a voice to amplify their participation in public spaces, but also to be able to speak to participate in income-generating activities without being held back by the patriarchy and the status quo in the area.
And maybe to encourage someone that is watching who is probably one of the victims of this war, are there testimonies that you've had from these women that have recovered? And that is an earlier question I had asked you, but I want you to clearly bring out the testimonies that the people have managed to go through your hands and have been able to say, you know what, I am better and the war is no longer affecting me.
Of course, having victims come out and tell their stories about how you've been able to help is one of those things that we look out for as FIDA Uganda. And we have had several testimonies of women who have come out and have started organizing actively. Some of those women have been able to register community-based organizations to encourage their other people from the neighboring districts in Apa, in Lamor, to come and speak, but also to be able to participate in, for example, cultural meetings where they were not able to do that before. So we've had several, I cannot put it in number in particular, but we have had so many women that are now owning businesses that are able to work. Women who can stand up and speak during the cultural meetings where they demand that they have a piece to cultivate or to do whatever they want to do.
And what about the communities around these women? Are they very receptive to the idea of allowing them back?
Yes, we've had very, I cannot say really we've not had good feedback from some of the communities. Like I mentioned earlier, the cultural leaders are very influential in the community that we work in. So you find that we use that as our in point to get into the communities. And you find that some of them have been responsive. And it's because of the deep-rooted and progressive cultural norms and systems that you find that some of these people, for example, reject some of the women that have children that do not have fathers, you see. So we've had some of the communities being very responsive. Some of the areas where we've had a lot of force back and having to push back and forth really have been with mostly land, because the LRA disrupted, first of all, boundaries, but also the aftermath. You are not there then, so you returning and claiming that this was my land is something that you cannot do. And government made a move to start giving titles to several landowners in actually sub-county, and that has not been easy. FIDA has been working with the government to see that that goes on, but it's been one of the hardest parts because we know land is really core.
And maybe family now, and finally, now that you have the platform to actually talk to people or to communities that are watching us, what would you really love to tell them, the communities that you know, have these women around them? What would you really love to tell them so that they help these women back home? They help them settle back home. They help them, you know, regain their sense of living, their sense of happiness, and everything to do with having to live. Yeah, to the government, through your parliament, we really want for the government to actively go ahead and follow up the resolutions that were passed in parliament this year in February from Honorable Komakech. Profile the women, get to know their needs, and about having a fund to help the women get empowered, but also help them be able to access and participate in businesses like their other counterparts who are not, for example, abducted during the war. Let that fund be monitored. And how can it be monitored? Involve civil society as a monitoring hand, involve cultural leaders, because from the kind of work that we've been doing as FIDA in that area, we have found that cultural leaders are a very good link between the people
and the parliament, or between the people and the government. So let there be an active move, not to have just a resolution, but have work on ground being done.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for
Thank you
coming
for
to our
having me.
studios. Okay. Now, that was it in Talk of the Nation, but I also want to add my voice to what she said, that these women probably were not in the right state of mind to do what they did. And to everyone that is watching us right now, we'll just like to ask you to accept the women back home, help them settle back, because today it is you, tomorrow. Today it's them, tomorrow it is you. Now, that was it in Talk of the Nation. We'll be back shortly.